Hi everyone, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify their existing skill set. Every week we go live Friday at 2 p.m. with a film professional to chat and give you a chance to ask questions. Today I'm joined by Simon Walker, colorist, educator, and he works with Maxon Red Giant and does so much more. Hi Simon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks for having me on.
How are things going with you right now?
It's like many of us, we are surrounded in our same environment that the days are blurring together somewhat.
I'd love to talk to you. I'd mentioned to you just before we came on air that I found a bio of you, and it talks about a seminar that you gave about visual storytelling through color grading. I wonder if you could tell me what that involved and how do you use color grading as a storytelling tool?
Oh, this was born out of the years ago. I've been a freelance for many years before I was then doing training, and we were doing color correction and just helping people change the tone of their timelines and tell stories with color. And it proved such a popular thing in a non-technical way that I started doing these seminars about how you can use different colors to tell different stories, and you can change the emotional temperature in the room. And it's all respecting the what you've got in the frame. Like if you have, the classic thing, if something is really blue, they expect it to be cold, but what if they're wearing clothes that don't look like they're feeling cold, and that has a different aspect and that sort of thing. So it was born out of that, and it ended up by accident doing it, really, because most of my job was technically doing grading settings and showing people how to do that. But it's very interesting, and you can't give it up. They see it all the time, every day.
Well, is that what you were doing with your Instagram with the teal and orange, telling stories?
It's become mainstream now, and
Yeah.
back when we started to be able to do color on the computer, then the easiest thing to do was to honor the skin tones, which are, as far as the computer's concerned, on the I bar in the vector scope, they're kind of orangey. And with different luma values, of course. And then the opposite color of that is something that artists have been using for many centuries to kind of have that saturated contrast, or those color hue contrasts. And it was easy to push, or it still is easy to push those shadows to bluey green and have them complement those skin tones. And then, of course, we all go crazy with it. And so you see online all the time, all the films look the same because we've got that spread of that grading, and that science fiction is slightly bluer and horror is slightly greener for all sorts of interesting reasons. And sometimes you just want that look. But I just started seeing orange and teal everywhere, just in silly setups. Like you're waiting for a taxi, like in Tokyo, it's wonderful opportunity because lots of the taxis are teal. And so you could just sit there and wait for somebody to walk past with something orange. And that it became a joke that got out of hand, really.
And so you mentioned there that you talked about, famous painters using this color scheme. What were some of the, artwork and artists that you looked to when you were becoming a colorist?
The National Gallery in London is wonderful because you can just walk around there for free, and you can get right up close to the paintings, and in the last couple of years they allowed you to take photographs of it, and it's wonderful because you can go right up to a Caravaggio and look at all the small little details. They'll draw on the clothing or the cloth or the skin tones and see how you can get that depth. And that resonates really nicely with what you can do in color grading. And you can use power windows in Resolve or masks in Premiere and so on, just to kind of emulate the different light falling on different areas. So you can add depth into like a 2D frame. And it's like a combination of things, walking around the gallery, seeing how people are using that, seeing how Pissarro, for example, just used small little dots of paint and mix those together like the Impressionists. And so you're mixing it in the eye, as it were, rather than actually as colors. People like Gauguin and Cézanne using that as in extreme form, but it's really born out of that. But even Ingres, centuries ago, was doing this with the paintings that he was doing of people to kind of illustrate separate people from the foreground and the background. And that I did a whole okay, shameless plug, I did a whole course or several courses on lynda.com, which is now LinkedIn Learning, of course, where talking about different times of day and how you can fake those with different color, and also how you can simulate things like the chiaroscuro that the Dutch impression or the Dutch masters were doing, and Rembrandt certainly used different details of color strokes on different areas of the image, creating like a virtual vignette. And you can kind of simulate that in color grading. So it was just really an observational thing, which turned into something which was quite useful to influence color grading, and quite a useful tool to kind of educate people about what to look for when they're watching movies. And now no one will watch a movie with me. So because it's like, oh, did you see that? So even if I don't say anything, they say, like, I can hear your brain going. So
because you've touched on a lot, and like in how the art and everything plays in there. Do you find that a lot of young colorists are missing that sort of side of like the history of painting and photography and everything, and how that impacts color?
In some cases, but you don't have to have a classical education to appreciate this. And Instagram and all the filters that we've got on Snapchat and so on have educated us widely to be able to enjoy the results of it without necessarily having to sit and think why it's working in those particular ways. So I think people get the aesthetic, but certainly in case of how you need to break it down and then how you would achieve certain things, I think it is absolutely important to understand from a colorist point of view, technically what you're doing. Then that crosses over into what technically the format is, and whether it's an 8-bit, that gets really boring then, 8-bit codec versus a 10-bit, what type of monitor you're looking at, what kind of color space. And we get this, an interesting question, because we get that all the time. Yeah. And every Monday, we run a demystifying webinar, which is like a free open webinar. We've been running these all year. And this month, sorry, this sounds like it's plugging, but it's just, it's either a very clever question on your part, or just that is because we've been doing this recently. But we've been doing exactly that. And last week on the sessions, we talked about what does it mean to be a colorist? And we were breaking down, myself and some professional colorists, Diego Yama and Tony Barry, and also Max Raharo from Maxon. We've been all kind of sharing our experience and say, what does it mean? Not just from a technical viewpoint, but aesthetically and from your experience and what kit you've got, and then combining all those together to kind of look through and challenge those details, because it's a balance. That's that with the creative, and it's kind of to kind of manage. So it's a whole series of concepts, I think.
It's what's interesting, like one of the things that sort of like grabbed onto there when you were saying it was talking about how with Instagram and everything, you know, people are almost when I work with students who are learning editing over the last 10 to 15 years, I've seen this shift where they've become so media savvy that they've somehow through osmosis just absorbed a lot of the techniques and stuff that we used to have to really hammer home to them. Is that what you're finding in color?
Yeah, absolutely. And also I like the fact that you can completely break the rules as well. And there's so many examples of this with framings of shots and so on, just like in the first series. And I remember, this is a while ago, but first season of Mr. Robot, all the characters were misframed deliberately, and you kept expecting from the language of horror films, if somebody is sitting over one side of the frame but they're framed as if something's happening in the background, you're expecting something to happen, but it doesn't. So it kind of engages you somehow in the screen a bit more. And you can do that with color as well, and use the wrong colors the wrong colors. There's no such thing as a wrong color, but you can use non-expected colors to actually to break out of that, and especially via your delivery method. So it might be for like a syndicated or a streaming series, or it could be for something which is just delivered on your phone. But even so, now with the higher bit depth you've got and the wider color range you've got in screens as well, it's all bets are off. So it's quite fun. I almost wished we had what we had now, like 10-15 years ago, when I was really building up my color grading training. It's because you're right, you're absolutely right. People have been educated purely by watching, which is fantastic.
Now you've been working with Red Giant since I believe 2008. So how did you become involved with them?
Just by going to events. I think it was at IBC that I first bumped into them, and they were showing Magic Bullet looks, and then I started using that, and then they asked me to show it to customers, and then I did a number of the big super meet things that they have in IBC, and then we did some in London, and then that turned into jumping in. Oh, can you come and show this at NAB over in Vegas every April? And then we started doing it at Interviewees in Tokyo, and so on, and suddenly it became a regular thing, which is fantastic. But it's the same story, actually. Interesting enough, internationally, it's still the same concepts. So even outside the computer, that resonate with people. But it kind of changes slightly depending on the location. And interesting, a lot of the questions when you're doing sessions in Tokyo, for example, they like to talk about grading animated material. So whether it's stuff for games or whether it's anime stuff, as well as traditional shot footage. Or it's not footage. I love how we call it footage. When was the last time we measured any of our digital content in feet? But still.
Now you've touched on something there that's really interesting, and that is, you go to Tokyo and they have different things that they want to focus on in terms of color grading. Now, do you find that, from the storytelling seminar and what have you, do you find that different cultures utilize the colors in different ways to tell their stories? Is there anything that sort of sticks out for you?
Absolutely. So many different colors mean so many different things right across the globe. And as I mentioned earlier on, it's all contextual, because just the color white, for example, like that, if you've got something with a really white room, so it's really lit brightly, there's no color in there, for example, that can look clinical and clean. But of course, in the Far East, white is also symbolic with funerals, so it can be symbolic of death. And it's just like picking two examples out of a hat, and then you got the same example with many different other colors. And green is very popular to look at ecologically, but green is also popular in horror movies, because when things decay, they go green. And from the research I was doing, the reason that the witch in Wizard of Oz was green was because they wanted to show off Technicolor. And in the original source material, there was no mention of a green skin tone. But it's something that resonated, because many of the posters for the Hammer House of Horror movies and so on had green for the like the zombies and the evil heroes or anti-heroes. Even though it was a black and white movie, they colored the posters green in those cases. So it depends, and that's really the answer we joke about on our training sessions. It's like, what is everyone asks the question, what is the blah blah blah, and the answer is always, it depends. So it's contextual with the environment, I think.
Well, and that would almost make it trickier, especially for Hollywood colorists or people working in the US, because their stuff goes worldwide. Do you think they should start taking into context the other countries' colors or the way they interpret colors?
There's definitely happens as well. You've got these stereotypical ones where you've got anything that's in Mexico, for example, seems slightly orange.
Yeah, or yellowish kind of.
And then you cut back to London. I think Skyfall did this. Yes, exactly. Or Hot Country or North Africa, for example. I think Skyfall did it where they were cutting between that and HQ London where it was raining. That was slightly blue. And then they cut back, it was slightly red or slightly warm yellow in the highlights and so on. So there's some aspect of that. And then you can reverse it as well to mess up with expectations. But I think it is interesting, and it depends on the thematic values that you want to represent. But there are a number of core things. One is you want people to look realistic most of the time. You have to honor their skin tones, and also you are kind of referencing the mood of the genre. That kind of sets it up. So I think largely we play by the rules, but then that gives us the ability to break them and to do some other things.
Now, you've also you mentioned Maxon and Red Giant are now a team. What do you do with Maxon and Red Giant at this point, with Maxon sort of coming on board?
Well, we joined forces earlier this year, and Maxon famously make a 4D, and in the previous year they acquired Redshift, which is a renderer that fits very nicely in with cinema. And we then joined forces with Red Giant, who make plugins for all sorts of different post-production disciplines, whether it's just speeding stuff up in the timeline, or doing motion graphics really quickly, or color grading, or compositing. And so it kind of is a nice mix of tools. And so we've got a training team. I look after mostly the broadcasters' professional production facilities, but also we run training for individuals. This is the thing that we do every Monday on YouTube, for example. Well, it's on GoToWebinar, but we play the recordings on YouTube. And so it's an interesting mix because everyone on the team has got their specialism, and we overlap in some ways. But it's a wonderful thing seeing, they always say play chess with somebody who's better than you. And that's what it feels like with all my team. They're constantly reminding me how much I need to learn in all these various areas, which is really good. But it does mean that we're able to look after all these different disciplines, which is fantastic.
Now, one of the things that I've noticed from the teaching that I've been doing online, because everything's shifted because of COVID.
Yeah,
we've been doing online teaching primarily, and that what I've found at least is the attention span sort of is interrupted almost. Like they're no longer in front of you, so they're no longer looking straight at you and at what you're doing. They're hidden, and they can have the internet up, they can have Instagram up. So what are some of the techniques or ideas that you utilize to sort of make sure that they stay focused from a distance?
But it doesn't only happen online. The number of times where I've been in the classroom and you just get up and walk around the classroom ostensibly to see if you can help anyone, but it's just really to check that they're paying attention. And those times where people have just quickly hid that they're playing Angry Birds, the ones that are sitting at the back of the classroom, or they're surfing something else. So that always happens as well. But actually, having run many full day classes where you turn up for either 3 or 5 days, and then you do sit there and you immerse yourself in it, there's absolute value in that. But people learn in so many different ways, as well as fact that some people are visual learners, some people like to read the manual first, and there's combinations of that, and some people like to have it explained, some people like to investigate it for themselves. And so I think an interesting aspect of doing these sessions remotely is that you can do them in shorter segments, which I think is better for memory retention, and you can develop this over time. So it's nice, especially with the team, that we're able to run these things over time and revisit techniques and remind people what we covered previously and pick up on those. And I think it's, joking aside, we have to respect that people are having to manage lots of different things simultaneously. But I think just having that repetitive nature and that ongoing relationship is quite useful to help people through how they like to learn, and also to inspire them. And sometimes it's not just a how to use this slider. Sometimes it's really interesting to have a nose around a project and then show how that's put together. And then also share experiences about what you do under any particular circumstance, or what you've had, what corners you've had to break or cut rather, to actually make something work that you wouldn't necessarily admit to. And that happens all the time. So it's just really being flexible with it. So again, long-winded answer, it depends, but I think the constant, the repetition, I think, is key, and staying in touch with people, and just asking them how they felt with it, and getting feedback, seeing their examples, asking people to share, all the usual things that we're used to doing, and it's a community involvement. I think that's the trick.
Now we have a question online from Alex, and he wants to know, do you ever get raw material and have to create a look for that material? And if so, what is your creative process for creating the look for that project that is open?
The excellent question, and the answer is yes, all the time, absolutely. The further answer is then having to make different looks to tell different stories because the client changes their mind. But I think that's another key. It may be that you're working with a client or a producer, or you might be in sports where they want a particular look and you've got to turn it around quickly. But that's the key, I think, having the dialogue and knowing where you're going, what story you're going to tell. And that might be with yourself. You might be the person who is making those decisions as well as the person who's executing the grade. Mm-hmm. So story-wise, I think that absolutely is the first instance. Where are you going with it? What do you want to communicate non-verbally or non-visually, if you like? Or what I mean by non-visually is what the characters aren't doing, and what do you want to communicate with them in the story? And once you've got that down, technically, you always start with the contrast, and you start adjusting the shadow values and the highlight values and the midtone and the gamma, and you get a balance of the detail in the shot and how contrast you want to be. And then you move on to the color, especially if you're matching that with different shots. And if you've got a range of shots, I recently had to do a whole series of basketball shots from different venues and match those together. And so it then becomes, what do you match? Do you match the venues? Do you match the flooring? Or do you match the shirts? They're all wearing different colors. And in that case, it was important to match the skin tones across. And so that they were of a similar value across all the different clips. And then you can get away with some of those other elements. But that's all balancing. That's all setting stuff up. If you're talking in terms of a look, then once you've got your balanced shot, then you can start to play with those stylistic or thematic changes, like messing around with the highlights and making them slightly cooler or slightly warmer, or adding in different colors and making those vignettes or power windows. So it's a whole process. As I wish it were just add a LUT. I know you can buy these whole packets of LUTs and looks, and in fact Magic Bullet looks it delights in that, because you can use that as a mood board. But I think the trick is, once you've done that, you can then get up to speed quickly and then tweak it according to the story you're going to tell. So it's all about the story, as ever, as with all of these things, I think.
What would you say was your most challenging request in the color suite as a colorist?
Oh goodness, I can tell you what my challenging request was professionally.
Sure.
But it wasn't in the grading suite. It was at a film festival. But in terms of the grading suites, I think the key challenge is time, because it's so much fun just to talk about the story and the color. But if you've got to grade a show and you've got 45 shots or 200 shots or however much it is, and you've got only a certain amount of time, then that is the key, because you have to then deliberately decide to stop playing and actually execute this on different shots. So I think without a single instance, that would be the biggest challenge. Just making sure that you execute that, and you give yourself enough time at the other end of the deadline, so you don't run out of time to fix some things that you hadn't noticed yet. But professionally, the most challenging moment was, this was about 10 years ago. This is at the Frankfurt Film Festival, where I was doing 90 minutes on color grading in front of the president of the Association of Cinematographers. And there are a number of he invited a number of key colleagues. And of course, when you're a cinematographer, you shoot with the grade in mind. And somebody asked, do you shoot flat and just grade according to whatever story then comes up, or do you shoot with the grade in mind? And coming from post, where it's mostly having to fix things and change things at the last minute, I kind of fell off the fence onto the, I would probably give myself more leeway. And of course, this ended up into a long open mic dialogue with these cinematographers, because they vehemently were thinking, no, it's the other way around. We know exactly what we want. So in that case, if it's a film, then that makes much more sense, and you want to solve some of your problems ahead of time, absolutely. But then you don't always get that luxury. And if you're working on, like, for example, the Formula One teams, and they take a footage from the archives from lots of different locations, they've got to make it all look similar, even though it was shot in different formats, like on film or even videotape from the 80s, and stretch it out so it's the right width as well, and the right aspect ratio. Again, it depends. But there's the standard answer.
How do you, because you mentioned time being one of the trickier things, how do you make sure that, when you're given a project and it has a tight deadline, that you get to every step or everything that's necessary?
There's some technical things you can do. In Resolve, it's very common nowadays to build up a series of nodes where you've got nodes for doing the contrast and the adjustment, and then you also have nodes for doing windows, and then nodes for doing looks, and then you combine those. And then a lot of colorists I know do that, set that up so that they've got the ability to open up a project which is 6 months old, and they know where to go instantly for that one particular tweak. And if you're building it up from scratch, you don't have to then spend that time dragging nodes onto the screen. And you can put that into things like Avid or Premiere Pro as well, because you can set up projects in advance. And all the boring stuff, making sure your folders are in the same format, and making sure you've got lists of effects or stacks of them that you can apply, and presets that you can apply to get you started. So I would say that it's some of those disciplines are quite useful for time, but then there's also the factor when you're having that conversation with the client or the producer or whoever you're working with about what story you're telling, and then how much footage you're dealing with. And then I had a job years ago where it was ostensibly only a few days edit, but then they said, we've got 37 one-hour tapes for you to preview before you start. so can't do that in a lunchtime.
Yeah.
So sometimes it becomes obvious, but I would say it's a mixture, of course, of some of the creative stuff and allowing yourself a certain amount of creative time, but it's only a project if it gets delivered. And so much of a colorist's job is to make sure that it's legal, it doesn't clip the highlights or the shadows in certain ways, and it's got the right color manipulation in terms of the format and balance. And so it's, again, it depends, but I think it's a balance of disciplined project management, boringly, sorry, but also then giving yourself time and limiting the creative time and not letting it run away with you, because it's really easy to just work these long days. And there's a reason why we've got scopes, because we can't trust our eyes, especially after you've been staring at the same colors for hours and hours. And it's so important to resist just working those extra few hours into the evening and then doing the same thing all over again the next day, because after a while you stop seeing things. So that's, I would say, look after yourself as well as making the job work, again, with the balance of those things.
Now, I have one last question that I like to ask everyone I interview. We've been in a pandemic for the last several months. And so a lot of people have had a chance to catch up on their Netflix viewing or their Hulu viewing. What is a show that you caught during this pandemic that you would say, this is what you have to watch while we're sort of locked inside for these months?
Oh no, you've got me on the day where episode 3 of Mandalorian has come out. I've been waiting all week to see that. The I would, oh goodness, excellent question. The sometimes it's interesting to not think about the new stuff as well. So my official answer is Mandalorian, because I absolutely love the thematic things that they're doing in it, and how they're referencing and leaving Easter eggs in and playing with your expectations about how a certain character might appear in a certain way, and you think, hang on, what's going to happen? Then they change that. So this is spoiler free at the moment, but a really interesting study in color, I think, is Sicario, which came out a few years ago, where I mean, so it's a very interesting thematic film in terms of who's the hero and who's not the hero, and the blurring of those lines. But the thing that jumped out to me was the use of beige. You know, when they say, what's your favorite color? And no one says beige. But thematically, I mean, there's some fantastic kind of video essays on this on the internet. And if you're giving out links to people to watch the recording, I'll send you a link of this particular one, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
But the beige aspect in this film tells the story of a certain character, and also kind of draws you in a way that then begins to represent menace and danger. And it's a lovely example of how a color you wouldn't expect, because of the color it plays off and very dark shadows often with it. It's very interesting use of that particular color palette.
Thank you so much for letting me interview you today. Oh,
you're welcome. As you can probably guess, I could talk for hours about these sorts of things, because they're so much fun. But if we are, can we give out links on the recording? Because I'd love to give some of these links, like the open webinars that we've been doing.
Yeah, no, I'd love to get
every
those.
Monday, and some of these other links for stuff like I have to say, because I'm from Maxon, next Wednesday, 18th of November, the 3D Motion Show, 3dmotionshow.com, is doing some amazing breakdowns creatively of some projects that the artists have put together. So I'll give you that link anyway. But
perfect. We'll post those as soon as we get them.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the conversation. It's always fun to chat about it.
Yes. Well, next time we're in the same city, we'll have to get together.
Absolutely, yes.
All right. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.